Hello, I'm going to do something which I hope will be interesting, I hope will be at the very least distracting, and will potentially teach you a new skill. Because what we are going to do is look at having a go at doing a historic standing buildings recording of your own house. Now, when most people think about archaeology, what they think of is they've seen maybe a documentary like Time Team or something like that, so they tend to be thinking about knitwear and beards and real ale, or they've seen Indiana Jones and they're thinking of that. Don't think of that. This is a little bit more like the former. You don't necessarily have to wear the knitwear. It's quite nice outside, but it does use the same principles as archaeology. Everyone's thinking about digging in the ground, and if you're going to take away anything from these videos, it's worth learning one thing, and that is the idea of stratigraphy. This is what all archaeology is based on, the idea that the thing lowest down when you dig is the oldest, and everything layered on top of that is new. Right? The idea is something that goes in the ground or goes on the ground and is then slowly covered over time by dumping, destruction layers, flooding, and each of those processes leaves a layer of material, and they build up and build up and build up, which is why archaeologists have to dig down to get to things. And stratigraphy is all of those layers, and to understand a site, what you do is you dig off each layer in turn, systematically, and that helps you understand all of the processes that went to forming everything on the site. You can understand how the site developed. The exact same thing is used to understand a historic standing building. The only difference is that it is called phasing. There you go, you've learned something. With phasing, what you're looking to try and identify is the principal build, the first part, the whole structure, and then you can understand everything else that comes out of it. For example, if you build a wall, you have to have built a wall first before you can build anything into it or anything onto it or done any repairs in it. So understanding phasing, you can understand the development of the building. But that's just the building itself. Structures don't exist in a vacuum. You have to understand a lot more than that. So we won't just be looking at the nuts and bolts of the structure around you, how to describe walls, windows, and what those are. But we'll also try and work out what the wider context is, how the landscape around the building might have affected its shape or its function, how social situations and the things that a society values are reflected in the buildings. Everything from where the material is being brought from, what materials are being chosen, what architectural styles are being reflected, how many people might be in each building, what the building was used for, if it's changed use. All of that can help you understand a society. Right? It's not just bricks and mortar. In fact, in some places it's definitely not bricks and mortar. Some are glass and steel. See, buildings, they're an endless source of fun. And that's what we're going to look at. Why do we do these recordings? Very fair question, the internet. There's a lot of different reasons why archaeologists do it. There's a legal requirement. 95% of archaeology in the UK is done in a way that is referred to as commercial archaeology. That is that you as the developer, if you're going to develop land and there's a potential of finding archaeology, or there's known archaeology on the site, then you as the developer have to pay for that to be excavated professionally. That was not always the case. Prior to 1990, there was no legal requirement. This law did not exist, and it was one specific site that changed all of that. It was the excavations of the Rose Playhouse on the south bank of the Thames. This was a building that is associated with the late 16th century, early 17th century drama, all that sort of Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, Kit Marlowe, that kind of thing. So obviously it was a really important site, and they allowed archaeologists on, but the plan was they have a little bit of a look at it and then they dig through and they build flats. That would be the end of it. Except that angered the most powerful protest group in England, old white actors. At the very least, you do not want to annoy them because their protest songs are enunciated. You know, what do we want? To be heard. When do we want it? Whenever we like. We're classically trained. They were led by a pre-Sir Ian McKellen, which means archaeology in the UK is only protected under law because Ian McKellen stood in front of a bulldozer and said, "You shall not pass." So that is the legal framework for it. There's also, you know, research, interest. In this instance, I thought it would be quite fun because we're all going to be stuck in our houses. We might get to understand them a little bit more, or it could form the basis of a history project for some of the kids that are currently now seeing me as an enemy for even suggesting a project. But it's a fun way of seeing your neighbourhood in a different light. And it's a skill. And we've all got time to learn something new. Why do buildings get the special treatment of archaeological recording? Usually what happens is a planning condition will be attached to a building because they've been identified as having a particular significance. Whether they are aesthetically interesting, historically interesting, or if they've got some sort of protection. Those protections can take the form of, for example, like whole landscapes can be protected because the way that the buildings interact with each other and the look of the general look of the area is what is being protected. So that might require a higher level of recording if your building is in one of those areas. You can have individual listings. And please excuse me, I am using, this is going to be a lot of UK based references. There are different ways of protecting structures legally around the world, but I know the UK one more. And the listings that we use are quite interesting, or their origins are at least. They come from World War II, from the Blitz. The idea was that they weren't just going to be military targets. There was also plans to attack cultural targets in an attempt to sort of break the spirit of the British people. One of those areas that was thought to be on that list of targets was Bath. So in reaction to this potential threat, the people of Bath started recording their historic buildings. The thing that made them such a target was the architecture of their city. So they started recording it and grading them with this listing system of grade 1, grade 2, grade 2 star. After the war, that listing system was rolled out nationwide, and that is where we get that structure from, and where most people would understand this idea of different levels of protection and different levels of significance for buildings. But historic standing buildings recording doesn't just do these great stately homes and castles and things. I've done glass bending factories, you know. You can't understand a society by just looking at the top 1% of its things. You'll only ever find out about kings and queens if you do that. What's far more interesting about buildings is you get to find out how day-to-day people, how people live day-to-day at the sort of like, you know, the normal working populace. And hopefully you will be able to do that yourself. We're going to be looking through these videos at producing a level 2 recording. There are 4 levels designated by Historic England. You can download a PDF of how to record standing buildings from the Historic England website, and they lay out exactly what those levels are. But in short, level 1, visual recording, just photographs, very basic. Either the significance of the building is low or not much is being done to it, so a photograph is enough. Level 2, what we're going to be doing, that is a descriptive record. That is where you are doing photographs, a written record of how things are, identifying what the structure is like at the time of recording, and some drawings, which we'll cover in later videos. Level 3 is all of that from level 2, but it's referred to as an analytical recording. That means that instead of saying, for example, there is a blocked door in this wall, you would then say there is a blocked door in this wall because the use of the building next door became a private property and the two buildings were split in half. You try and understand why the changes are taking place. So it's another higher level of record. Level 4 is the very highest level. That's basically a book. You're doing lots of historical background, you're doing lots of recording in minute detail. You might produce something called photogrammetry, 3D models of the structure, laser scanning. It's like the highest level that you possibly come at. But we're doing level 2, so that's what we'll look at. And that's what historic standing buildings recording is and why we do it. And now for the first lesson, I want you to look around the building that you're in and ignore it for a bit because we're not going to do anything with the actual structure just yet. We're going to try and get an idea of the landscape around it. And I know you can't go out walking, but you can look out your windows, and more importantly, you can go online and have a look at some of the digital resources that will give you an idea of the context of your building. Context is key. It can mean so many things. Where a building is in the country could tell you a lot about it before you've even started. If, for example, just pulling something out of my head, if you're in Yorkshire, you'll find a lot of the vernacular standard architecture is built out of material which is local, which is stone. So you've got a lot of stone buildings in the Yorkshire Dales. In Norwich, they don't have as much stone in reserves, so you find most of those buildings are tile and timber. However, if you find a stone building in Norwich, you immediately know something about that building. It has had a lot of money put into it. It may have been built after mass transit has allowed materials to be moved easier. The person who has purchased that or commissioned that house wants it to stand out, or wants it to do something that requires a different material to support it. So you immediately, straight off, just knowing the context of the building, where it is, you're starting to build up a picture of some of the decisions that are being made around it. So what we're going to do, how do we build this information up? Maps, records, photographs. Maps, that's number 1. I want you to go now, find your address on a website called Old Maps, a beautifully straightforward named website which has a series of historical maps. You can zoom in on your address, your location, click over it, and on the right hand side of the screen there'll be a bunch of different maps. Have a look at the changes to the landscape. Record any differences in what's around and try and find out at what point the building that you're in came into existence. It can also tell you, have a look around it to see if there's when other buildings came into existence. If they came around the same time as your house, it might be linked to why it's being built there. For example, if there's a new road, new access, that might be the reason why they've built your building. If there's a new factory, it could be because your structure has been made for one of the workers. So understanding the landscape tells you more about the history of your house. Another resource worth going to is the National Library of Scotland. They've digitised a huge number of historical ordnance survey maps from the mid-19th century up to the mid-20th century. They're ordnance surveys, so you know they're going to be good. They're not like hand-drawn on the back of a matchstick. Hand-drawn on the back of a matchstick is actually a very impressive map when you think about it, but probably useless. Unless it is of a very... I'm getting sidetracked. If you live in London, there is a resource that you're incredibly lucky to have access to, and that's called Layers of London. This website has digitised some really, really interesting maps. Things like the Booth Poverty Map, which records Booth's impressions of the level of degradation or wealth within different streets, almost house to house sometimes, of whether people are high or low status. Or if you're coloured in black, criminally poor. It was very judgy. There are bomb damage maps on there. There are insurance maps identifying which buildings were, sort of high risk of a fire. Can tell you about the uses of a structure. If you, for example, live in a warehouse conversion, you might have an idea of what the building was used for prior to being turned into a domicile. All of that information is quite cool. You can also find other map websites. Local areas and archives have digitized different material, so look into what your local archive is and how much they have available online. Look for things like postal records, census data, anything with an address on that can tell you about the people who live in that house, or what the building has been previously used for. And use maps as a jumping off point as well, because it might tell you that there's something nearby, or it might tell you that your building was used for something else, so it's a good start point. If you want to spend a little bit of money, go to British Newspaper Archive, for example. You might not find your address specifically, but again, you'll build up a picture of the area around it. It costs about £10 to get a 1 month subscription. Probably worth it to have a look. It's quite cool to just type in your surname, for example, as well. Fun. Also go to, if you're in London again, the LMA, brilliant, has a resource called Collage, which they've digitised a load of photographs and illustrations. Really exciting. You might not find your building, but again, you're just building up a picture of what's around. Yeah, so this is what I would like you to do now first. Go out there, see what information exists online relating to your building, because this background and context is what we will build from when we do the recording work on the structure itself. Please share those with me, actually. I think it'd be really interesting to see what people dig up, particularly if you find anything unusual or interesting about the building. You can get in contact with me probably most easily on Twitter at Paul Duncan McGee, or on Instagram at PDMcG, that's PEEDEEMCGEE. I really would like to see what people are doing with this. And next video, we'll start on what you need to know to build and create a written record. The form function, what evidence you're looking for change, all of those different things. Everything that you'll put into a written record. But for now, we need to build up the context, build up the history, and we'll all get back together in, should we call it a week? If I can find the time, that'll be cool. One last thing, you don't have to do this, but if you've got a bit of spare change, on my Twitter account, I have got one of those links to the coffee thing. If you are doing this, if you're going through the workshops with me, it would be interesting, it would be cool if you've got some spare money to send it this way. If not, or if you need it, keep it. But, that's the begging section over. Till next time, have fun, find out something interesting about the house, and we'll all meet back here and we'll start talking about written descriptions. Okay? Bye!